Many people say that the water you drink, the food you eat, even the clothes you wear might be slowly killing you. And these folks will also say that there's one family to blame for all of this, the DuPont family. But how true is this really? I mean, they have an estimated net worth of over $18 billion, and they managed to preserve their wealth and influence for nearly 200 years. From the alleged role in creating forever chemicals to profiting from wars and monopolistic control, the DuPonts are certainly one of the most controversial and powerful families in history, and that's why I wanted to explore this topic a bit further. This is the story of the DuPont family. Now, if you're a fan of the channel, you might know that other powerful families that I covered, such as the Fuggers and the Rothschilds, had humble beginnings. But this was not the case with the DuPont family. Rather, they came from nobility. The story of the DuPont family begins with Pierre Samuel DuPont. He was a French economist and a politician and an ardent supporter of the French monarchy. He is remembered for playing a key role in shaping trade policies between France and Britain. In particular, his biggest career highlight was the Treaty of Versailles in 1783. This treaty laid the groundwork for the free trade agreements between the great two powers. His work elevated him in the court of Louis XVI, and he later served as secretary to the Assembly of Notables in 1787. As you can see, life was great for him, but then this little thing called the French Revolution happened, and this did not go well for Pierre. You see, Pierre had opposed the radical Republicans during the French Revolution, and he even defended King Louis XVI. This put him at odds with the revolutionaries. Fearing for his life, he was forced into hiding during the Reign of Terror. He was eventually found and later imprisoned. However, he managed to secure his release through the help of his connections. And knowing that his life was not safe under this revolutionary regime, Pierre DuPont fled to America. There, he aimed to create a self-sufficient colony and just keep a low profile. But as luck would have it, he quickly found himself in the halls of power once more. You see, President Thomas Jefferson was looking to purchase the territory of Louisiana from France. And because Pierre was a seasoned French statesman and an incredible asset, he became a very trusted advisor to the president. Pierre would later briefly return to France to take his revenge and plot to overthrow Napoleon. This happened in 1814. He played a key role in helping the cunning diplomat Talleyrand to restore the monarchy after Napoleon's defeat. Pierre became Secretary General of the Provisional Government. He was even appointed as a counselor of state by the new King Louis XVIII. But unfortunately for him, Napoleon returned with a vengeance from his exile in Elba. So at that time, Pierre once again had to return to the United States, fearing for his life. Now, while Pierre was off doing his official roles in France, other members of the DuPont family were seeking opportunities that America offered. The family business started with Pierre's son, Eleuthère Irénée DuPont. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, but back in France, Eleuthère had been trained under the famous chemist Antoine Lavoisier. After moving to the United States, he discovered the great potential the country had when it came to gunpowder products. This right here is a very critical point in the story. He decided to open a gunpowder mill along the Brandywine River in Delaware in 1802. Initially, the business struggled, but then the War of 1812 happened, which again pitted the United States against Great Britain. Now imagine life in the early 1800s. There's a war happening. What's the one thing you need? It's gunpowder. As the key supplier of gunpowder in the military, the DuPont family's fortunes started to grow massively. And this wouldn't be the last time that a war saved the business. But beyond his role in the company, Eleuthère also became the director of the Bank of the United States at the time. This further increased the DuPont family's influence in the country. After his death in 1834, the company was briefly managed by his son-in-law before his children grew old enough to take control. They ran it as a family partnership from 1837 to 1850. A gunpowder empire was born. His two sons were Alfred Victor DuPont and Henry DuPont. Alfred was the first to lead the company. You see, he was adverse to risk. He continued the path his father had laid down for the family enterprise. But on the other hand, his brother, Henry, was more ambitious. He took the reins in 1850, overseeing the company's growth for the next 3 decades. Despite being a West Point graduate, Henry left the army right after 1 year to join the family business. Under his leadership, DuPont grew massively. It expanded its reach, acquiring powder works across the country, including in California. And at this point, the company saw another great boon in fortune. the Civil War in America. This created a massive demand for gunpowder, boosting DuPont's profits. The expansion of railroads in the Midwest further fueled its growth and allowed it to expand its operations. However, it wasn't just external factors. Innovation within the company also played a very big role in their success. In 1857, Alfred's son, Lamont DuPont, patented a soda powder. This chemical made gunpowder production cheaper and more reliable. In 1880, he established the Repono Chemical Factory to produce dynamite, a powerful new explosive developed by Alfred Nobel. Now, if that name seems familiar, you're right, it's the same guy behind the Nobel Prize, the prestigious award for peace and achievement amongst other things. It's kind of ironic that it got funded by the very explosives that fueled war and destruction. Anyway, back to the DuPonts. After a century of success, the family suffered a near disaster. When Henry DuPont died, his nephew Eugene DuPont took over the family business. Although he managed the company well, it didn't see much growth during his tenure. You see, he lacked the drive and influence of his uncle. This caused the company to not only stagnate, but remain unprepared for the challenges ahead. As the 20th century drew nearer, the DuPont empire began to decline. Unsatisfied with their performance, the board of directors decided to sell the company. However, Alfred DuPont, along with his cousins Thomas Coleman and Pierre DuPont, managed to purchase it at a very low price. Now, all three cousins were under 40, and so they brought fresh, youthful energy to the business. Each played to their strengths and managed to turn the ship around. They turned the family partnership into a corporation and centralized the production of explosives. Now, even though they managed to save the ship from the iceberg, they only resulted in steering it straight into a looming storm. The way that they were aggressively expanding didn't go unnoticed. The Congress started to pay attention, and this led to legal trouble when the company faced its first antitrust lawsuit under the Sherman Act in 1913. The outcome was not in the family's favor. They were instructed to split DuPont into 3 companies. Now, this was a pretty big blow because the company recently acquired massive profits resulting from the Great War happening in Europe. Now, they were forward-looking though, because soon they realized that the demand for explosives would dwindle after the war. They realized that the company had to diversify while the times were good. Otherwise, they would have to risk going under. So, they switched gears. This shift had already begun in 1917 when DuPont acquired technology from a British company and entered into the dye stuff industry. They were shifting gears towards producing dyes and other associated chemical processes. And by the time Pierre resigned as president in 1919, the company had become a fully diversified chemical company. Turns out that the same materials like nitrocellulose originally used for explosives ended up being just as good for other industrial products. This was a turning point for the company, and the DuPont family expanded into paints, solvents, celluloid film, artificial leather, and even automobiles. By the late 20s, they became the largest company in the dye market, reducing the US reliance on European imports. Now, diversifying takes a lot of money and investment, but this wasn't an issue for the DuPont family. It is reported that they were the largest supplier of military explosives in World War I. Another money-making channel was the company's strategic investment in General Motors, at the time when the private car industry was just beginning to explode in size. DuPont's innovation continued throughout the 20th century. They introduced products like neoprene synthetic rubber in 1931 and nylon in 1938. Now, this is where the story gets interesting because one of the company's most infamous synthetic materials that they invented, which was made by accident by the way, was Teflon. It was a young scientist by the name of Roy J. Plunkett who accidentally discovered Teflon while working for DuPont. Now, his original assignment at the time had been to develop new chlorofluorocarbon refrigerants. At the time, such a discovery was considered groundbreaking. I mean, your only other options were sulfur dioxide and ammonia, and both of these were highly toxic and could poison people. So Plunkett produced 100 pounds of tetrafluoroethylene gas, or TFE, for tests. He stored the chemical in small canisters or cylinders at dry ice temperatures. But the next day, when he and his assistant tried to release the gas, nothing came out. What was curious though was that the cylinders weighed the same. They were very intrigued and they opened it up and they found a mysterious white powder. They tested it and they found it to be heat resistant and chemically inert. It also showed extremely low surface friction, making it nearly impossible for other substances to stick to it. The material defied what science believed at the time. Plunkett had unknowingly created an entirely new substance that would later be known as Teflon, and created the era of non-stick cookware and other material. The discovery couldn't have come at a better time for DuPont. Just a year later, war would engulf Europe again. However, it was also a catalyst for the company's explosive growth. Like I said earlier, war created an environment and a market that made it very profitable for this company. Now, DuPont's so-called wonder material, Teflon, would be at the heart of this success. It became an essential item for raincoats, airplanes, auto exhaust systems, cookware, and metal coatings. The company came out of war extremely rich. By the 1950s and 60s, DuPont was expanding heavily into foreign markets and developing groundbreaking materials like polyester, wrinkle-resistant synthetics, and flame-resistant fabrics. But at the same time, DuPont was cementing its takeover of the chemical markets, various mergers and acquisitions which helped to dominate the industry. However, this led to public outcry over reduced competition. But at this time, DuPont was simply too big and too powerful to bring to heels. Laws like the Sherman Antitrust Act or the Clayton Antitrust Act had been designed to prevent monopolies like this. However, they didn't really work against DuPont. Few companies had the resources to match its inventions or the size of their operation. Even as it faced a series of antitrust trials through the 60s and 70s, the company's profits just kept on rising and rising. And behind all of this success, DuPont managed to keep a secret. However, the secret wasn't too well hidden. People started reporting these ominous signs in the 80s. According to a report published by the Time magazine in 1981, it was reported that female employees at a DuPont factory in Parkersburg were abruptly moved away from areas producing C8. C8 was the code name for a group of chemicals used in making Teflon. Now, no explanation was given, and the workers were certainly not told about their pregnant colleagues who had recently given birth. Alleged health reports state that some of these births were defective. The babies had eye defects, strange nostrils, some of them had ear and tear duct issues, and there was one report of C8 being found in an infant's blood cord. I mean, C8 is defined today as two chemicals, PFOA and PFOS. Now in public, however, they're more infamously known as forever chemicals because they hardly ever break down in the environment. Once they get inside you, they stay in your body for decades. Now used in thousands of products from textiles to non-stick pans to firefighting foam, there are many claims that PFAS have been linked to various health issues including cancers, developmental delays, hormonal disruption, and damage to the immune system amongst many other symptoms. Now, in that same Time magazine report, it is alleged that the DuPont company and their partner company 3M actually had preliminary evidence of how toxic these chemicals were as early as the 1960s. In 1962, an internal DuPont scientist studying Teflon warned that it may react to excessive heat. He actually stated that Teflon may not be so inert. In 1965, an independent research conducted a link between Teflon and polymer fume fever. In other words, sickness that was caused by inhaling fumes from heated Teflon. Despite this, allegedly, DuPont chose to remain silent. More damning evidence came when DuPont's own research found that Teflon exposure caused liver enlargement in rats. The scientists advised extreme caution and to avoid any contact with the skin. Yet, these warnings never reached the public. In the 1970s, studies from their Washington Works power plant showed that C8 could be highly toxic when inhaled and moderately toxic when ingested. And yet, once again, allegedly, DuPont remained silent. By the 1970s, the company heads were all aware of the dangers of their wonder product, according to sources. Now, it's important to note that during this time, the family had majority control over the decision-making of the company. It wasn't until the mid-1970s where non-family members began to enter the board. Only then did their influence begin to wane. By sheer coincidence, perhaps, the same period saw secrets being finally leaked. And with time, the exposure of PFAS toxicity became impossible to hide. As more concerning evidence emerged, the public scrutiny intensified. Journalists and investigative reporters were hot on track in unveiling what some termed as the biggest health scandal of the century. In the year 2000, health officials near a DuPont factory discovered multiple forms of PFAS, or commonly known as forever chemicals, in the local drinking water. When this news was made public, DuPont quickly reassured that they had toxicological and epidemiological data to provide confidence that the exposure guidelines established by the DuPont company were protective of human health. But it didn't really matter because the genie was out of the bottle. Independent researchers were increasingly publishing studies linking PFAS to various health risks, including cancers. Now, there were two landmark legal cases that also brought the dangers of PFAS to the public's attention. In the same year, 3M announced that they would cease manufacturing PFAS-based Scotchgard. Now, by this time, there was panic amongst the DuPont leadership team. An internal DuPont email acknowledged the truth. They said that the chemical is too persistent in the environment and it gets into our blood. It also hinted at the looming consequences by adding, "It must get public first, better late than never." In 2002, after two major legal cases had been ruled against DuPont, the company scrambled to regain control of the narrative. A company vice president made an urgent appeal to the EPA. To them he wrote, "We need the EPA to quickly, like first thing tomorrow, say the following. Consumer products sold under the Teflon brand are safe and there are no human health effects known to be caused by PFOA." The EPA refused to comply with this request. The legal fallout was set in motion. In the years that followed, DuPont faced numerous class action lawsuits as the full scope of the PFAS scandal began to unravel. And finally, in 2023, DuPont alongside Chemours and Corvetta agreed to pay over $1 billion in settlement. Now, these were claims related to forever chemicals contaminating public water systems across the US. Yet, despite the size of the settlement, critics argue that the fines were not harsh enough. New research that year revealed just how dangerous these chemicals really were. The EPA issued health advisories based on the latest science, indicating that these chemicals were far more hazardous than previously believed. Now, because of this, critics say that this fine that they paid was nothing more than a slap on the wrist for the companies because they made tens of billions of dollars while endangering public health. New reports say that exposure to forever chemicals has also been widespread, that these chemicals are now being found in the blood of nearly every human on Earth. The long-term effects of what has been happening is still unfolding. Many scientists say that they've only scratched the surface of understanding the full scale of the damage. And this is not something that will just stay with us for a lifetime, but may continue poisoning us over generations. Now look, is it possible that in the future, scientists and scholars will likely look back at this era with a mixture of disbelief and condemnation? Will they wonder how governments and corporations allowed such widespread exposure to toxic chemicals despite knowing the dangers that they posed? Will they ask why the warning signs that were detected so early were ignored in favor of profits? Or will they just continue to act the same way? Well, only time will tell. But is it true that they had no contribution or benefits to humanity? Absolutely not, because we can't deny that the DuPont family and their company made significant contributions to industry and therefore to society. They've been at the forefront of scientific innovation, developing products that revolutionized various sectors. They developed nylon, which was the world's first synthetic fiber, and transformed industries like textiles, clothing, and even military supplies. Kevlar was another DuPont invention, which is widely used in bulletproof vests, saving countless lives in law enforcement and the military. Their creation of neoprene or synthetic rubber in the 1930s also provided a durable alternative to natural rubber, which has been used in everything from car tires to medical equipment. In agriculture, DuPont's innovations in chemicals and seeds contributed to increased food production and more resilient crops. The company also played a key role in the space race, supplying materials like Teflon and other polyamers for spacecraft and satellites. So there's always two ways to look at the legacy of DuPont to see what their impact was. However, Edward Abbey, a writer and environmental activist, said it best when he said, "Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell." When corporations are allowed to prioritize endless expansion over human health and environmental well-being, the results can be devastating and it can impact us for generations. The DuPont family is a unique example of financial prowess, immense growth, innovation, but also of ruthless expansion, and in many cases, secrecy. Now, if you stay till here, leave an upside down smiley emoji in the comment section, and please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would mean the world to me. And if you haven't already, check out this video that I made about the Rockefellers. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.